Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming and my continuation of the Scion Origin game that I've been running named Tokyo Noir. To recap for you the characters, as this is always useful, we have Shinobu, a professional wrestler, very much loves the passion, the enjoyment, the entertainment of her business. She is a fighter, but she keeps most of her combat to the squared circle. Shinobu is the scion of Bishamon, a god of punishment and justice. We also have Yuki, a hard-boiled detective. Yuki is likewise a scion of Bishamon, very much takes her violence out on criminals, perhaps a little too much, and she is the sister of Shinobu. We have Ryohei. Ryohei is a restaurant owner next to the hotel that Shinobu was currently staying in. We don't know what kind of restaurant it is. This is now becoming a bit of a running theme in the game, that he just won't identify what he's serving in that restaurant. But he's an award-winning chef, and he has a direct connection to the crime that we're about to face. Then we have Nix the Interloper, as she's already been called, the intruder. She's a Brit. She is currently touring Japan, or Tokyo, as a very popular DJ of electronic music, and is a good friend of Shinobu, because they both perform on the same bill. The DJ often warms up the crowd before the wrestling starts, and they're currently staying in the same hotel. Nix's favourite restaurant is the one next door, run by Ryohei. So immediately you're starting to see that web of connections between the characters, those relationships that make a game so interesting. To recap the plot for you, the characters each discovered very swiftly between each other a body, dissected, in the alley between the restaurant and the hotel. Ryohei stumbled upon the body first, and it was when he screamed out that the passing Shinobu and Nix, who were returning to their hotel after a night of performance, stumbled upon the grisly crime scene as well. They called the police, and who was to turn up but Yuki, the sister of Shinobu, and a homicide detective. Immediately, Yuki had her crew among the police to seal off the crime scene and for the experts to analyse it, while she took those three witnesses, being Shinobu, Ryohei and Nix, off into the restaurant that had now closed for the night to interview them. And this is pretty much where the gameplay started, when we really started getting a feel for the characters. A new relationship formed in this very roleplay, something that they applied retroactively and I loved, and that was the idea that Yuki and Ryohei had at one point been in a relationship that didn't go well at all. Ryohei was a bit of a philanderer, and so the air was quite thick between them. But this was good because it basically allowed pretty much every character to have a connection to at least two others. I really appreciated the players coming up with it, and we just rolled with it. So what did they discover? Through a use of both their Scion knacks, being their powers, and also the investigation system in Story Path, which, to break it down briefly, allows you to assign each success to a different thing, like a question and answer, a new clue, a new revelation about something you're investigating. It's a very nice, succinct system. They discovered various things, such as the deceased. They wouldn't have known this if they hadn't used their powers. The deceased was a patron in Ryohei's restaurant the night before, well, on the night of his murder. He was male, and while Ryohei didn't know the name of the patron, he does know that this customer was dining with a lady. The whereabouts of this lady are unknown. There is no security footage from within the restaurant, but one of the waiters or waitresses, one of the service, may know more. And so I started scribbling down potential NPCs. We also discovered that nothing had been stolen from the body. There was still a wristwatch, and there was still a wallet, although Yuki, of course, put them in evidence. And the other characters haven't seen them yet. In fact, even Yuki hasn't checked them yet, or at this point, because she was going to take them back to the station first. The precinct, if you prefer. The other big revelation was that this body that had been so dissected, cut quite cleanly, one might say, although that's difficult to ascertain, they were able to do it, was murdered in the alley. not disposed of there. And this would be quite the crushing revelation when Yuki returned to the precinct to write up her report and was immediately told by her inspector, Maeda, we've already had a report of someone throwing themselves in front of a metro train. The identity of this deceased matches the identity of the person who threw themselves in front of the train. Some macabre idiot must have deposited the body parts in the alley. Shut this one down, it's a suicide and a prankster. Yuki immediately knew there was some kind of cover-up going on. But as there's already her bosses breathing down her neck and trying to get her to break away from this case and other cases like it, she's not sure how far she can push it. Now, you might have noticed, as I've been talking about this, there's occasionally little comments are popping up along the bottom of the screen. And the reason I'm doing that is because a lot of these plot elements are being introduced by the commenters, the people who have been watching these videos. So if at any point I talk about a plot element that I've taken from your comments and put in the game, I will put it along the bottom of the screen. I'm reading all of them and I'm incorporating as much as I can whilst keeping the plot sound. So thank you very much and keep doing it. So Yuki's at a bit of a loss. It's at this point she identifies the deceased as a Takeshi Sasagawa, a very wealthy corporate businessman. Owns his own company, electronics, and not only that, this was something that was particularly pertinent to Yuki. Mr. Sasagawa was a criminal that she had failed to put away because she'd been too violent with him. She had caught him assaulting a woman, and rather than putting him in cuffs, taking him to the station, she beat the ever-living shit out of him. He was able to put charges against the police. All charges against him were dropped, again on the instruction of Inspector Maeda, and so Mr. Sasagawa walked away a free man. This was around a year before. But ever since that time, in typical hard-boiled noir fashion, Yuki had been following Sasagawa, just waiting for the next crime that he might commit. To find that he had now been butchered in such methodical fashion gave Yuki a mixture of satisfaction that someone had dealt with him, but also, of course, great frustration that someone else had dealt with him. Meanwhile, we had Nix and Shinobu, and they were the ones who came to the revelation first that this was fate working them. And what do I mean by that? Well, fate is a very big part of Scion, and the characters being basically strapped to fate's loom and having their destinies woven together is a huge element of the game. I wasn't going to force the fact that each of them were Scions and aware that each of them were Scions immediately. It's Shinobu and Nix's friendship that pretty much pushed that to the forefront. They realised things about each other, that they were able to do slightly better than human things that forced that revelation, and therefore Nix asked Shinobu about her sister, and of course Yuki is also a scion of Bishamon. And this just left Ryohei, and through deduction they realised that the odds of 4 people who knew each other either tenuously or through direct links, each stumbling upon this grisly murder scene that's clearly telling them something, was enough to tell them that fate had conspired to bring them together. All of a sudden, we have a band of potential heroes working together to solve a crime. Cutting to Ryohei, and Ryohei has been in touch with Yuki because Yuki, although she doesn't like him, knows that he's popular around the precinct. Many a time have they called for takeout from his restaurant, and although it was an award-winning restaurant, we said, okay, he occasionally does takeout. He has a Deliveroo-like service. People pick up his meals, take it to the precinct when they're working late. And so she asked whether he could come personally to the precinct to deliver some food, because he was needed, his cash was needed, to get into the morgue. Yuki wasn't allowed in the morgue. The inspector was quite adamant, had instructed other police officers to keep her away and put her on something else. It's almost as if the inspector wanted to hide something. Ryuhei, however, was not so limited. He's an intensely social character, whilst also being a master of his craft, and arriving at the precinct was able to basically manipulate / charm his way into the morgue, which takes some doing, especially when you're a chef. And this is where we started, of course, joking about what kind of meat he generally serves, because the the morticians only seem too happy to allow him in. Yeah. This hasn't ever been the case with Kishoten's Scions before, but why not? Either way, he managed to sneak his way into the morgue, slipped the mortician a bit of cash to turn the other way while he poked around in there. His actual excuse was, a friend of mine threw himself in front of a train the other day and I wanted to just see him before he was put on ice. And although this corpse was basically exploded, this is the guy from the alleyway, the mortician allowed it. So, Ryuhei entered the morgue by himself and found the body and had to hold his guts, his own guts, to prevent himself from throwing up, because the state of the former Takeshi Sasagawa was quite a disgusting one. But Ryuhei made a valuable revelation. Again, examining the body and deciding to examine the body in full, which took some doing and did result in a little bit of vomit, allowed him to realise that there was kanji carved into the body. The body had been carved up in such a way as to spell out in kanji a crime, specifically murderer. And the chunks, once reassembled, basically spell that out. It was very clever, and thank you to the person who commented that, because that was a fantastic idea. Well, Ryuhei took a photo on his phone, quickly bolted from there, then stopped at a bar to get a drink. Cutting back to Nix and Shinobu, they had decided, because they got back from their show, from performing at their show. It was late, the restaurant shut because of this murder, and they were still hungry, and so they decided they would go and seek out a noodle shop or similar nearby. As luck would have it, there is one on the other side of the street. It's a very popular little joint, you know, just a couple of tables, you stick your head in, get your noodles within a few minutes, and wolf them down within 5 to 10. So they went over to the noodle shop, where they bumped into Aki. Aki is the proprietor of this noodle shop, a very friendly young lady who, of course, knows a lot. A bit of a gossip, but she's got a good eye on the street. In fact, she should be able to look straight into the alley on the other side of it. And so they started asking her questions. What did she see on that night? Well, she of course saw the police arrive, and her eyes have been glued to the blue lights and yellow and black tape that's been cordoning off the area since then, but she didn't see any crime. This disappointed them somewhat as they tucked into their ramen, but again, what they discovered through further probing was of quite a lot of interest to them. She did see Takeshi Sasagawa and his female partner enter the restaurant that night. And what's more, the female partner had stormed out of the restaurant and come over to her noodle shop. Whilst the proprietor, Aki, wasn't able to identify her by name, she could say what this lady told her. Apparently, she had had a fight in the restaurant with a business rival that Sasagawa had refused to sell. So she wouldn't stand to be in his presence anymore, had thrown a glass of wine over him and stormed out. Decided to pick up some noodles for the way home. Immediately, there was the potential for motive, but was she the person responsible for this? They would have to track her down, and that would require identifying who exactly she was. Yuki had returned to the scene of the crime by this point. And she was examining the spray of blood. She's not a forensic scientist or anything like that, but she was examining the spray of blood, where the body parts had been left, seeing whether she could identify any clues. Ryohei had by this point informed her about this murderer, Kanji. And it's exactly as she thought. Yuki had always assumed that Sasagawa had taken his assaults too far, as if assault isn't bad enough, at one point or other. She knew that at some point or other he had killed, but had never found the evidence for it. Clearly whoever had murdered him was some kind of avenging angel. And this cast her mind back, because she's seen crimes like this before, with people being chopped up into pieces, but never before had she identified the kanji linking them. Not all of them had been quashed by the inspector's command, but lately the last couple had. And so she was compelled, once she got back to the precinct the following day, to look up crime scenes. But before we got there, she asked the blood spatter analyst who was on the scene, how did this happen? And he had received the same orders from the inspector. People were quietly packing up. They weren't allowed to comment on it. And he told her, someone's just thrown the blood all over the place to make it look like the murder occurred here. So Yuki grabbed him by the collar and slammed him up against the wall and said, someone has been murdered here and you're going to do your job even if the inspector tells you not to. And again, using some of her Scion given gifts, after all she is the daughter of the god of punishment, she put the squeeze on him. Okay, he replied. It's quite clear this person has been cut by a blade, but not just a blade, he has been cut clean through with a blade. I've never seen anything like it. Usually, for someone to be cut up like this, it would require hacking, sawing, anything like that. But every single slice through this corpse is so neat and precise, and one slice each time. I have never seen anything like it, and that's why the blood sprays look like they do. Frankly, he said, it's amazing. It's miraculous. It's a work of art. And that's where he started to disturb her, and so she gave him a slap and let him go. So, the party congregated before the night was out, and they shared the information with each other. Yuki received a call before she retired for the night from the inspector's office. We understand you have been interrogating one of the crime scene analysts. She didn't order him to shut up and not tell anyone about this, and he wasn't that scared of her. If we find you're pushing into this crime even 1 more centimetre, you're going to be off the force suspended for wasting police time and money. There are crimes you could be investigating, and a suicide is not one of them. Being aware that the death had occurred in the alley, and being told by the inspector, no, this is a metro death, solidified in her mind that there's obviously something incredibly corrupt going on in the police force. But why these murders in particular? What does the inspector have to hide? How deep does it go? The information gathered had told them these various things. They all retired for the night, and come the morning, furthered their investigation by interviewing other people. Ryohei spoke to his waiting staff. Yuki was trying to keep on the down low and instructing Nix and Shinobu how to do the same thing. Specifically, they were to find out where Sasagawa had been before he attended the restaurant. And, as if fate demanded it, he had been at their show, but he left halfway through. Again, this female guest. The waitress at Ryohei's restaurant backed up Aki at the noodle shop's story. There had been a very tense, almost violent meeting in one of the private booths in the restaurant between Mr. Sasagawa and his business rival. There had been shouting, and eventually she had thrown a glass of wine over him. and she stormed out. So that held up. They'd been talking all about selling parts of the company, and in the lady's words, you need to get this material off your books, you need to get it cleaned up, and you need it away from me. So the one part of the story that didn't match up was his corporate rival saying that she wanted to buy them. It seemed, in fact, that she was somehow deeply embedded in them, and Sasagawa had been doing something illegal. She wanted him to launder it, make it clean, get it away from both of them, and he was refusing. What Shinobu and Nix were able to discover, perhaps more excitingly for them, was the pair of tickets that Sasagawa had purchased. He had purchased them in 2 individual names, although one of them wasn't cashed in at the venue, at the dome, where the wrestling was taking place. One of them was for Takeshi Sasagawa. One of them was for just one name, Tsukioka. Was this the lady's name? There was no evidence of her appearing at the dome, and on the security footage that they were able to access through a little bit of, again, guile and stealth, she didn't seem to appear there. Who was this Tsukioka? Who did the empty seat next to him belong to? Why did they not show up? Why did he leave halfway through to go to a dinner date with a business rival, only to tell her that he wasn't going to do what she thought he was going to do? Who killed him? And why did they kill him in such a manner? Well, there's a couple of fantastic ideas that I'm not going to talk about yet because it's a bit of a mystery, but they are coming directly from your comments. When the session wrapped up, we actually found out what Yuki had been up to. She had only been communicating with the characters via mobile phone up until this point on this day because she didn't want to touch any of the crime personally. She had gone to a Yakuza contact, someone who owed her. An obese Yakuza mob boss named the Spider, whose tendrils wove deeply into this part of Tokyo. Because she knew that the lady he assaulted, Sasagawa assaulted a year before, was connected to the Spider. And for whatever reason, the Yakuza never took any action against him, despite the fact he had hit one of their own. And so Yuki was now demanding answers. Why? Why did you not deal with Sasagawa, and what are you going to do now that he's dead? What she gleaned from the Spider was he was under their protection, but he wouldn't tell her why. And as the session finished, she had guns pointed at her from around half a dozen gangsters in his seedy little nightclub. At which point he said, "You going to ask any more questions now, or are you going to turn around and leave?" And so that was our session of Tokyo Noir. And once again, I thank you all for your comments, for your input, for your various ideas for this game of Scion, because it's going really well and the players are just completely enthralled by the mystery, so thank you so much. Who is the murderer? That's going to be the big question. But there's a lot of smaller questions as well. Why was Sasagawa under the protection of the Yakuza? Who was his female dining partner? Why wouldn't he clean up his books? And, well, are the Scions going to be able to get to the bottom of it? As always, leave your comments below and give me your ideas, because I will use them as evidence in this video. Thank you very much for watching.